The moment you hear your own bridge collapse, you stop believing people will always ask permission. The first crack echoed across the valley just after sunrise, sharp enough to send a flock of birds exploding from the tall oak trees lining the creek behind my farmhouse. I looked up from the mug of fresh coffee in my hands, listening as another deep wooden groan rolled through the cool morning air. At first I assumed one of the old support beams had finally shifted after last week's heavy rain. But then I heard the unmistakable rumble of diesel engines followed by the metallic scrape of an excavator bucket tearing into timber. My heart sank before my feet even started moving. I rushed through the back door and stopped cold on the porch. Thick morning fog drifted above the creek, carrying the familiar smell of wet cedar and damp earth, but another scent had taken over the valley. Fresh diesel exhaust, hydraulic fluid, freshly broken wood. My family's bridge, the same bridge my father and grandfather had built more than 30 years earlier with their own hands, was disappearing one beam at a time beneath the arm of a full-sized excavator parked squarely on my private property. Standing only a few feet away, wearing a perfectly pressed navy blazer and holding a leather clipboard as though she owned the entire county, was Linda Brooks, president of the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. She pointed toward another support beam while speaking confidently with the equipment operator. Even from where I stood nearly 200 feet away, I could hear her saying the bridge was outdated, unsafe, and did not match the neighborhood standards. She never glanced toward my house. She never knocked on my front door. She never called me. There had been no certified letter, no county notice, no engineering inspection, and certainly no permission. They had simply arrived after sunrise and decided my property belonged to them. My first instinct was to run down the hill and stop the demolition before another piece of timber hit the creek. Instead, I froze for one long breath as my father's voice echoed in my memory. He always said that the smartest engineer never interrupts someone while they are creating evidence against themselves. I slowly turned around, walked back into the farmhouse, and opened the security system connected to every camera covering the property. Every angle was recording in crystal clear resolution. I activated my drone from the equipment shed, sending it high above the valley where it quietly captured every vehicle, every contractor, every conversation, and every movement below. Then I unlocked the old fireproof cabinet in my office and removed a thick collection of documents my father insisted I protect long after he retired. Property deeds, boundary surveys, county permits, easement agreements, engineering inspections, original bridge blueprints. Decades of carefully organized records rested in my hands while another loud crash echoed across the creek outside. I returned to the porch without saying a single word. Linda smiled as another section of the bridge fell away, completely convinced she had solved a neighborhood problem before breakfast. What she did not know was that the bridge itself was never the most valuable thing sitting on my property. Hidden beneath decades of legal paperwork was something far more important than old timber, something her entire neighborhood depended on every single day without ever realizing it. And by tearing down that bridge without warning, she had unknowingly placed the future of their only practical road directly into my hands. The excavator finally shut down just before 9 o'clock, leaving behind a silence that somehow felt louder than the destruction itself. Broken cedar beams rested along the shallow creek where my family's bridge had stood only a few hours earlier, and the scent of fresh-cut timber lingered in the cool autumn air like a reminder that some mistakes cannot be hidden once they happen. I remained on the porch until every construction vehicle disappeared beyond the tree line, watching the dust slowly settle over the gravel road. Only then did I carry the thick stack of documents into my office and spread them across the large oak table my father built when I was a teenager. Every folder represented decades of careful preparation: original deeds, county survey maps, bridge permits, engineering inspections, recorded easement agreements, maintenance logs. Even the handwritten construction notes my father kept while building the bridge rested neatly inside protective sleeves. As a civil engineer, I had continued updating every record after taking over the property because infrastructure does not protect itself. The people responsible for it must protect both the structure and the paperwork behind it. Outside, my drone continued recording the damaged bridge from above, while every security camera preserved the entire morning from multiple angles. I transferred each video on a separate backup, drives before reviewing the footage frame by frame. Linda never once attempted to verify ownership. No county inspector appeared before demolition began. No emergency order existed. No engineer evaluated the bridge. The contractor simply followed instructions given by someone who assumed authority she never possessed. I reached for the oldest survey map and traced my finger along the property line until it reached the narrow creek. The bridge sat entirely within my family's recorded boundary exactly as it had for more than 30 years. Beyond the bridge stretched a private gravel access road crossing my land under a permanent recorded easement. Hundreds of Willow Ridge residents used that road every week because it provided the shortest and safest connection to the state highway, yet ownership had never changed hands. My father always smiled whenever neighbors mistakenly called it the neighborhood road. He would politely correct them by saying, "Access does not mean ownership." I finally understood why he repeated those words so often. I opened another folder containing the easement agreement approved decades earlier when the subdivision was first developed. One paragraph immediately caught my attention because I had read it countless times during annual inspections. If the bridge or roadway experienced structural alteration or damage affecting safe travel, the property owner had both the authority and responsibility to temporarily restrict access until licensed engineering inspections confirmed safe conditions. My eyes remained fixed on that single paragraph while another memory surfaced. Every year, I submitted inspection reports to the county, even though most residents never knew they existed. Ironically, the bridge had always passed because I maintained it carefully. The only reason it now required another inspection was because someone else had altered it without permission. I quietly scanned every document into digital archives before placing the originals back inside the fireproof cabinet. Then I called the county engineering office, explained exactly what had happened, and requested an immediate site inspection along with certified copies of every recorded easement, permit, and subdivision agreement connected to my property. The county engineer listened carefully before promising to visit that afternoon. As I ended the call, another notification appeared from my security system. Linda had returned to the creek with 2 HOA board members, proudly pointing toward the empty crossing while smiling as though the morning had been a complete success. Looking at the screen, I realized they still believed the bridge had been the center of this story. They had absolutely no idea the real foundation of everything their neighborhood depended upon had never been wood, concrete, or steel. It had always been the legal documents sitting quietly inside my office. The county engineer arrived just after 3 o'clock that afternoon in a white pickup truck carrying surveying equipment, inspection cameras, and a thick field binder tucked beneath his arm. The warm afternoon breeze carried the smell of fresh sawdust across the valley, while the quiet creek flowed beneath the broken remains of what had once been my family's bridge. We walked the property together without rushing. I handed him copies of every document I had prepared that morning, including the original bridge permit, the recorded easement agreement, annual engineering inspection reports, certified property surveys, and the drone footage documenting every minute of the demolition. He studied each page carefully before following me down the gravel path toward the damaged crossing. The excavator tracks were still clearly visible. In the soft soil, and fresh splinters of cedar remained scattered across the creek bank exactly where they had fallen only hours earlier. He measured the remaining support structure, compared the dimensions with the original engineering drawings, examined the disturbed foundations, and quietly recorded detailed notes without offering opinions. His professionalism reminded me why proper engineering depends upon facts instead of assumptions. After nearly an hour of inspection, he closed his notebook and looked directly at me before explaining that the bridge had unquestionably undergone unauthorized structural alteration. Under both county engineering standards and the recorded access agreement attached to my property, the roadway connected to that bridge could no longer be certified for normal traffic until a complete engineering review determined the structure could safely support public access once again. Those words carried enormous consequences, but they were spoken calmly because they reflected established procedure rather than personal judgment. I thanked him, then requested certified copies of his preliminary findings before returning to the farmhouse. As evening settled across the fields, I organized every report into chronological order beside the original easement agreement. One paragraph continued standing out more clearly than any other. Responsibility for maintaining safe access belonged to the property owner, and if structural damage affected the roadway system, temporary closure remained both authorized and required until inspections confirmed compliance with engineering standards. My father had insisted I memorize that language years earlier, even though neither of us imagined it would ever become necessary. I drafted a formal notice referencing the county inspection, the recorded easement, and the applicable engineering requirements before attaching supporting documentation behind every statement. There were no emotional accusations, no dramatic language, and no threats. Every sentence pointed only toward facts supported by official records. After printing several copies, I drove slowly toward the entrance of the private access road where a heavy steel gate had quietly stood beside the fence for decades, rarely needing to close. As the evening sky turned deep orange behind the hills, I secured the gate and fastened the notice where every approaching driver would immediately see it. The temporary restriction would remain in place until the damaged infrastructure completed the required inspection process. Before leaving, I stepped back and looked down the long gravel road disappearing toward Willow Ridge. Hundreds of people would wake the following morning expecting another ordinary commute. They still believed the bridge had simply been an inconvenience sitting on private land. By sunrise, they would discover that the bridge had actually been one essential link in an entire infrastructure system, and the decision made without permission the previous morning had legally interrupted the only practical road connecting their neighborhood to the outside world. Morning arrived beneath a blanket of low-gray clouds, and the familiar gravel road leading toward Willow Ridge looked strangely different, with the heavy steel gate standing closed across its entrance. Cool air carried the scent of wet grass and cedar, while the quiet creek continued flowing beneath the damaged bridge as though nothing extraordinary had happened. I stood beside the gate holding a thermos of black coffee just before 6:30 when the first pickup truck rolled slowly toward the entrance. The driver stopped, stepped out, and carefully read the official notice attached to the gate. Within minutes, another vehicle arrived, then another, until a long line stretched down the gravel road as commuters, delivery drivers, school employees, and neighborhood residents quietly gathered around the posted documents. Nobody shouted. Most simply read every page from beginning to end. The notice explained that the private access roadway had been placed under a temporary engineering safety restriction following unauthorized structural alteration to the connected bridge, and that the county engineering office had initiated a formal inspection process under the recorded easement agreement. Every statement referenced certified documents attached directly beneath the notice. Shortly after 7 o'clock, a white luxury sport utility vehicle stopped abruptly near the front of the line. Linda Brooks stepped out wearing the same navy blazer she had worn during the demolition, but the confidence in her stride faded the moment she reached the gate and recognized the county engineering reference numbers printed across the first page. She looked directly at me and demanded to know why I had closed what she called the neighborhood road. I calmly answered that I had not closed a neighborhood road. I had temporarily restricted access to my privately owned roadway because the bridge supporting that transportation system had been altered without authorization and could no longer be certified for safe public use until the required engineering inspections were completed. She insisted the homeowners association had removed an unsafe bridge for the benefit of the community. Without raising my voice, I handed her certified copies of the recorded survey, the original bridge permit, the easement agreement, and the preliminary county engineering findings completed the previous afternoon. She flipped through the pages quickly at first, then much more slowly as each document confirmed the same conclusion. The bridge stood entirely on private property. The roadway remained privately owned. The recorded easement granted access but never transferred ownership. Most importantly, responsibility for restricting unsafe access rested with the property owner whenever structural changes affected the roadway. Several residents quietly gathered around while reading the duplicate copies I had prepared. One homeowner asked whether another entrance existed into Willow Ridge. A longtime resident answered before I could speak, explaining that every alternate route added nearly 40 extra minutes because the surrounding hills, creek, and protected wetlands left this private road as the only practical connection to the state highway. The realization spread through the crowd almost instantly. Another resident turned toward Linda and politely asked whether the homeowners association had verified ownership before authorizing demolition. She hesitated for several seconds before answering that they believed the bridge belonged to the neighborhood. At that exact moment, the contractor who had operated the excavator slowly walked forward, carrying his work order. He admitted he had relied entirely upon the homeowners association's instructions and had never been shown any ownership documents before beginning work. The conversation grew remarkably quiet after that. Nobody argued anymore, because facts had replaced assumptions. As the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, shining across the locked gate and the damaged bridge beyond it, I realized the situation had reached its turning point. The discussion was no longer about inconvenience. It had become a lesson every person standing there would remember whenever property rights, engineering responsibility, and careful documentation crossed paths again. By that afternoon, the quiet valley no longer belonged only to my family. County engineering trucks, survey vehicles, and representatives from the Homeowners Association Management Company filled the gravel shoulder near the entrance, while the crisp autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh cedar and damp leaves across the damaged bridge site. I stood beside the original survey markers as the county surveyor carefully positioned modern measuring equipment over the same property corners recorded decades earlier. Every laser measurement confirmed what the certified maps had already shown. The bridge had always been built entirely on my family's land, and the private roadway extending beyond it remained exactly where the recorded easement described it. There was no hidden technicality waiting to rescue anyone from responsibility. The documents and the land matched perfectly. Linda Brooks watched quietly from several yards away beside two HOA board members who no longer appeared eager to speak first. The confidence she carried only 2 mornings earlier had been replaced by careful silence as each new measurement strengthened the same conclusion. The contractor who had performed the demolition voluntarily handed the county engineer every email, work authorization, and scheduling document he had received before bringing equipment onto my property. None contained my signature. None contained county approval. None included an engineering inspection. They reflected nothing more than the Homeowners Association's mistaken belief that authority existed where it never legally had. One management company representative reviewed the paperwork beside me before quietly admitting that no ownership verification had been completed before approving the project. As the afternoon continued, residents gathered behind temporary safety barriers, hoping to understand why the investigation seemed so thorough. The lead county engineer explained that infrastructure affects everyone who depends upon it, which is exactly why ownership, engineering standards, and legal responsibility must always be verified before any structural changes occur. Several neighbors nodded in agreement while studying the enlarged survey maps displayed on folding tables. Many admitted they had crossed that bridge for years without realizing it belonged to a private landowner who maintained it at personal expense. One elderly resident smiled gently before saying that people rarely notice responsibility until someone fails to respect it. His words lingered in my mind because they perfectly described everything my father had tried to teach me. Later that afternoon, the Homeowners Association Management Company requested a formal meeting with the county engineer and its own board members inside a temporary field office overlooking the creek. Nearly an hour passed before everyone emerged carrying organized folders instead of hurried opinions. Linda slowly approached me and quietly acknowledged that the association now understood the bridge, the roadway, and the easement far differently than they had only days earlier. She stopped short of offering an apology, but for the first time she asked what would be required to restore safe access correctly. I answered exactly the way I would answer any engineering client. The damaged structure would require complete reconstruction under approved plans, county inspections at every major phase, and full compliance with current engineering standards before the roadway could reopen. Nothing more, and nothing less. She listened without interruption before nodding once and walking back toward the others. As the sun settled lower behind the hills, casting long golden shadows across the creek and broken timbers, I realized something important had changed. The conversation was no longer about who possessed the loudest voice or the strongest opinion. Every decision from that moment forward would be guided by measurements, permits, inspections, and documented facts, and that was exactly the kind of foundation capable of supporting a bridge far stronger than the one that had been torn down. Construction planning officially began the following Monday, and the atmosphere around the creek felt completely different from the morning when the excavator first arrived. Instead of confusion and assumptions, every decision now started with engineering drawings, county permits, inspection schedules, and carefully organized documentation spread across folding tables inside a temporary field office overlooking the valley. The cool morning air carried the clean scent of freshly milled cedar mixed with damp soil as crews unloaded materials under the watchful eyes of county inspectors. Bright orange survey stakes outlined every foundation point, while laser levels projected perfectly straight reference lines across the future bridge site. I stood beside the lead county engineer reviewing the final structural plans one last time before construction could begin. Together we compared every measurement against the original surveys my father had preserved decades earlier, making small adjustments only where current engineering standards required stronger reinforcement than the original bridge had contained. Although the reconstruction would honor the same location and appearance, the new structure would carry significantly greater load capacity, improved drainage protection, reinforced concrete footings, and modern safety features designed to withstand generations of use. Watching those plans come together filled me with quiet satisfaction because this project was no longer about replacing damaged timber. It had become an opportunity to build something better than before. Linda Brooks arrived shortly afterward wearing a reflective safety vest over her business clothes and remained respectfully inside the designated visitor area throughout the morning. She asked thoughtful questions instead of giving instructions, listening carefully as county engineers explained why every permit, inspection, and structural calculation existed. One inspector held up a bundle of reinforcing steel before explaining that the strongest parts of any bridge are often hidden beneath the surface where nobody notices them until they are needed. I caught Linda quietly nodding as she listened, and for the first time I sensed genuine understanding replacing misplaced confidence. Throughout the day, residents from Willow Ridge stopped by the observation area to watch construction begin. Many brought coffee and snacks for the workers while thanking the county inspectors for refusing to rush the project simply to restore convenience more quickly. Several neighbors admitted they had never realized how much responsibility rested upon a single privately maintained bridge until it disappeared. Hearing those conversations reminded me of something my father often repeated while teaching me bridge maintenance as a teenager. He believed people only appreciate dependable infrastructure after experiencing life without it. The contractor who had unknowingly demolished the original bridge approached me during lunch carrying a revised construction schedule approved by the county. He sincerely apologized once again and explained that his company had introduced a new internal policy requiring verified ownership records before accepting any future demolition project. I thanked him because meaningful lessons often become the strongest foundation for lasting change. By late afternoon, the first concrete forms had been completed, reinforcing steel rested precisely where engineering drawings required, and county inspectors signed every checkpoint before authorizing the next phase of construction. As the sun settled behind the western hills, casting warm golden light across the creek, I looked at the new foundation slowly taking shape, where broken timbers had rested only days earlier. The temporary gate remained locked because safety always comes before convenience, yet nobody questioned that decision anymore. Everyone standing there understood that reopening the roadway without completing the engineering process would betray the very responsibility we were working so carefully to restore. At that moment, I realized the strongest bridge being built in the valley was no longer made only of cedar, steel, and concrete. It was being built from patience, accountability, and the simple willingness to let facts guide every step forward. Nearly 3 weeks after construction began, the valley looked completely different from the morning I watched the excavator tear through my family's bridge. The sharp scent of broken cedar had been replaced by the clean fragrance of freshly finished timber warming beneath the afternoon sun, and the steady sound of impact tools had given way to inspectors quietly checking measurements against approved engineering drawings. The new bridge stretched confidently across the creek, its reinforced foundations hidden beneath the water, while smooth cedar decking reflected warm golden light across the valley. I arrived before sunrise carrying my inspection binder, a fresh set of engineering calculations, and the original hand-drawn bridge plans my father had carefully preserved for more than 3 decades. Standing beside the completed structure, I felt the same quiet pride he must have experienced when the first bridge opened all those years ago. The county engineering team began the final structural inspection shortly after 8 o'clock. Every guardrail connection, anchor bolt, drainage channel, expansion joint, and support member received careful attention before another signature appeared on the official checklist. Nobody rushed the process because everyone understood that lasting infrastructure earns trust through careful verification rather than optimistic assumptions. Linda Brooks stood nearby with several homeowners association board members watching each stage unfold without interruption. Her posture reflected patience instead of authority, and she listened closely as the county engineer explained why every inspection protected both the property owner and every family depending upon the roadway. Several Willow Ridge residents gathered behind the designated observation area, while children pointed excitedly toward the finished bridge they had watched rise from its concrete foundations over the previous weeks. Conversations throughout the crowd sounded completely different from those tense mornings at the locked gate. Instead of complaints about inconvenience, neighbors discussed engineering, property rights, permits, and the surprising amount of responsibility hidden beneath ordinary roads and bridges. The contractor who had unknowingly demolished the original bridge approached me carrying a framed photograph his crew had taken during the final day of construction. It showed the completed bridge glowing beneath the evening sun, with every worker standing proudly across its full length. He thanked me once again for allowing everyone the opportunity to rebuild correctly rather than allowing anger to define the outcome. I accepted the photograph with genuine appreciation because it represented far more than a finished construction project. It represented a lesson every person involved would remember for the rest of their careers. Later that afternoon, the county engineer completed the final load verification and quietly handed me the inspection binder. Every required signature filled the last remaining page. The bridge had officially satisfied every engineering requirement necessary for reopening. Before unlocking the gate, the homeowners association gathered for a brief community meeting beside the entrance. Linda addressed the residents with a calm voice, acknowledging that assumptions had replaced verification when the original decision was made. She announced that the association had unanimously adopted new procedures requiring independent confirmation of ownership records, engineering documentation, and county approvals before authorizing any future project affecting neighboring property. Nobody applauded dramatically because the moment did not require celebration. It required understanding. As I looked across the completed bridge toward the peaceful neighborhood beyond the creek, I realized the strongest structure standing in the valley was no longer measured only by timber, concrete, or steel. It was measured by the willingness of an entire community to learn from one costly mistake and build every future decision upon truth instead of assumption. The morning the county officially approved reopening the roadway arrived beneath a brilliant blue sky that reflected across the calm surface of the creek as though the valley itself had finally relaxed. The fresh cedar bridge stood quietly between the rolling hills, its clean timber glowing beneath warm sunlight, while a light breeze carried the comforting scent of pine, damp earth, and newly finished wood through the trees. I arrived early carrying 2 items that meant more to me than anyone else could understand. In one hand rested the original bridge drawing my father had sketched on yellowed paper more than 30 years earlier. In the other rested the county completion certificate signed only the previous afternoon after every inspection, every measurement, and every engineering requirement had been satisfied. For several minutes, I simply stood in the center of the bridge listening to the gentle sound of flowing water beneath the reinforced supports. The same creek had witnessed my grandfather clearing the original crossing, my father building the first bridge, and now an entirely new generation rebuilding it stronger than ever. Shortly before 8 o'clock, the county engineer arrived, carrying the final authorization package. Together we walked the entire length of the bridge one last time, confirming every guardrail, drainage channel, roadway transition, and approach remained exactly as approved. When we reached the entrance gate, he smiled, handed me the final signed document, and quietly said everything was ready. I unlocked the heavy steel gate that had remained closed throughout the reconstruction and slowly pulled it open. Within minutes, the first vehicles approached, moving carefully across the bridge at the posted speed while drivers waved through open windows with grateful smiles. Parents drove children towards school, delivery trucks resumed familiar routes, and local farmers crossed with equipment exactly as they had for years before the misunderstanding began. Nobody hurried because everyone understood the privilege of traveling across something rebuilt with patience instead of shortcuts. Linda Brooks arrived later that morning carrying a neatly organized folder instead of the clipboard that had accompanied her on the first day. She approached me with calm confidence tempered by genuine humility before explaining that the Homeowners Association had formally adopted permanent policies requiring independent verification of ownership records, engineering documentation, and county approvals before authorizing any future project involving neighboring property. She thanked me for remaining professional throughout every stage of the process and admitted that responsibility had become far clearer once assumptions were replaced by facts. I accepted her apology because it reflected honest growth rather than simple convenience. Around us, neighbors gathered beside the completed bridge sharing coffee, conversation, and quiet appreciation for everyone who had helped restore the crossing correctly. Children laughed while riding bicycles across the smooth cedar decking. Photographers captured the finished structure against the autumn landscape, and county inspectors packed away the last pieces of equipment before leaving the valley. Looking across the peaceful scene, I realized the greatest victory had never been proving someone wrong. It had been proving that patience, documentation, engineering, and respect for property could rebuild trust just as effectively as they rebuilt a bridge. Every beam beneath our feet now carried more than traffic. It carried the lesson that lasting communities stand strongest when responsibility is shared, truth is respected, and every important decision begins with the simple act of confirming the facts before taking action. Several months have passed since the new bridge reopened, yet every sunrise still pulls my eyes toward the quiet creek before I begin the day. The water moves beneath the reinforced cedar beams with the same steady rhythm it followed long before my grandfather first cleared this land. And the peaceful sound drifting through the valley reminds me that the strongest foundations are often the ones nobody notices. The smell of fresh timber has slowly blended into the familiar scent of pine, damp earth, and autumn leaves, making the bridge feel as though it has always belonged there. Every morning, local families drive across it on their way to work. Children ride bicycles along the smooth guardrails after school. Delivery trucks cross without hesitation, and farmers haul equipment exactly as they did for generations before me. Most people never stop to think about the permits, inspections, engineering calculations, or legal agreements quietly supporting every trip they make. And that is exactly how dependable infrastructure should work. Months after everything was finished, the county mailed me one final archive containing every survey, inspection report, permit, engineering revision, reconstruction photograph, and completion certificate created during the entire project. I carried the thick binder into my office and opened the same fireproof cabinet where my father had stored the original bridge drawings decades earlier. Carefully placing the new records beside his handwritten plans felt like connecting two generations through the same commitment to responsibility. He always believed that good engineering was not measured by how quickly something could be built. It was measured by how faithfully someone protected it long after construction ended. Willow Ridge changed as well. The Homeowners Association introduced permanent procedures requiring verified property ownership, engineering review, county consultation, and written documentation before approving any project involving neighboring land. Residents who once assumed the bridge belonged to everyone now understood the difference between access and ownership, and that understanding quietly reshaped the relationship between the neighborhood and every surrounding property owner. Linda Brooks remained active within the community, but her leadership took on a different character. Instead of beginning meetings with confident conclusions, she now began with careful questions, encouraging board members to verify facts before making decisions. Watching that transformation reminded me that real accountability is not about punishment. It is about learning enough to prevent the same mistake from happening again. One cool afternoon, a young engineer from the county visited the farm while studying historic infrastructure projects throughout the region. Before leaving, he paused on the center of the bridge and asked why I had kept every original document instead of replacing them with newer copies. I smiled because my father's answer immediately came back to me. Records tell the story that structures cannot. Bridges eventually wear out, roads eventually need repairs, and buildings eventually change, but honest documentation protects the truth long after memories begin to fade. As the evening sun settled behind the western hills, casting golden reflections across the creek and the smooth cedar railing beneath my hand, I watched another line of vehicles cross safely toward home. Nobody slowed down because they trusted the bridge beneath them, and that quiet confidence meant more than any courtroom victory ever could. Looking across the valley, I realized the greatest thing rebuilt had never been the bridge itself. It was the understanding that justice is strongest when it stands on patience, responsibility, careful preparation, and respect for the truth, because those foundations will always outlast the loudest mistake anyone could ever make.